The first thing Dr. Eris Thorne noticed about the architect was its silence. For a creature composed of crystalline light and woven gravity, a being that communicated in symphonies of shifting photons, its stillness was an unnatural void. The architect, whom the human colonists of Kepler 186f had affectionately nicknamed Beacon, floated in the center of the Grand Arboretum, a vast geodesic dome where Terran flora grew alongside the glittering, energy-based life of the planet, which the humans called the Lumen. For 3 decades, this partnership had been the crowning achievement of mankind's reach for the stars. We were not conquerors, we were cohabitants. The Lumen had met humanity's first tentative steps into their system not with weapons, but with a welcome that resonated in the pure mathematics of music. They were ethereal, ancient, and seemingly benevolent, sharing insight into zero-point energy and material fabrication that advanced human science by centuries. In return, humanity shared its art, its stories, its chaotic and vibrant biology. The Arboretum was the heart of that exchange, a fusion of carbon and light, and Eris, as the station's chief xenobotanist, was its keeper. He stood now, his boots silent on the mossy floor, watching Beacon. Usually, the architect pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, its fractal arms of light gently tending to the native glimmer ferns and the transplanted Terran oaks with equal care. Today, it was inert, its crystalline facets a dull, milky gray, absorbing the dome's light instead of radiating it. A knot of unease tightened in Eris's stomach. He had spent 20 years studying the Lumen, learning to read their moods in the subtle shifts of color and frequency. This quiet was the color of a scream held just beneath the surface. He keyed the calm implant behind his ear. Dr. Thorne to Director Valerius. I'm in the Arboretum. Beacon is dormant. I've never seen anything like it. The air in the dome was always a perfect 22 degrees Celsius, with humidity calibrated to the micropercentile. Yet Eris felt a sudden chill, a primal shiver that had no place in this perfectly engineered Eden. Director Eva Valerius's voice came back, strained, the usual warm confidence in her tone replaced by a brittle edge. We know, Eris. All of them went dark an hour ago. Every architect on the planet. They've cut all communication. The unspoken words hung in the silence between them, the ones we could see. Anyway, the Lumen were not a civilization of cities and structures. They were the planet itself, their consciousness woven into the very fabric of the world's strange ecology. The architects were merely the most comprehensible interface, the diplomats they created to interact with the fragile, fleshy beings who had come from the void. For them all to go silent at once was not a malfunction, it was a decision. Aris walked closer, his scientific curiosity warring with a growing dread. He reached out a hand, stopping just shy of Beacon's surface. There was no warmth, no familiar thrum of energy that always felt like a low, contented hum. There was only a profound coldness that seemed to leach the heat from his fingertips. It was the cold of a tomb. That was when he saw the change in the Terran plants. The leaves of the majestic redwoods that lined the dome's northern wall were curling inward, their vibrant green fading to a sickly, jaundiced yellow. A bed of prize-winning roses, cultivated from Martian-hardened stock, had wilted on their stems, their petals a bruised, necrotic black. The change was happening with impossible speed, a time-lapse of decay unfolding in real time. He felt his blood run cold as the realization struck him. "Eva," he whispered into the calm, his voice trembling. "It's the nutrient exchange. The mycelial network we integrated with their energy lattice, they've reversed the flow. They're not feeding it. They're draining it. The entire project, the symbiosis that had been hailed as the dawn of a new era of galactic cooperation, was built on a shared root system. Humanity provided the complex organic chemistry. The Lumen provided the raw energy. It was a perfect partnership, or so they had thought. Now, that beautiful, intricate system had been turned into a weapon, a biological siphon draining the life out of every cell of Terran origin within the dome. Panic flared in his chest, sharp and hot. "Eva, we have to sever the connection now." He could already feel it in his own body. A faint, creeping lethargy, a dull ache in his bones as if his very marrow was being drawn out of him. The colony's life support, its food processors, its biorecyclers, all were tied into the same planetary lattice. They had integrated themselves so completely, so trustingly, that they had handed the Lumen a knife and pointed to their own throat. Valerius's reply was choked with static and a sound Eris would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life, the thin, terrified screaming of 1,000 voices at once. "It's too late. Eris, it's not just the plants. It's us. They're unmaking us." The comm went dead, replaced by a piercing shriek of feedback that made Eris rip the implant from his ear. Through the sprawling canopy of the dying forest, he could see the main habitat cylinder, its transparent plasteel walls showing a scene of pure horror. Figures were collapsing, their bodies seeming to dissolve into gray dust even as they fell. The Great Betrayal, as it would later be called by the survivors, was not an act of war, it was an act of pest control. There was no fire, no explosions, just a silent, ghastly efficiency. Eris stumbled back, his legs weak, his vision tunneling. He fell to his knees on the dying moss, the wave of enervation washing over him. This was it. This was the end. He thought of his daughter, Elara, back on Mars, her face in the last message he'd received, smiling, telling him she was proud of him for building bridges to the stars. He had built a bridge, all right, and his people were being marched across it into oblivion. But as the creeping death flowed up his limbs, a different feeling ignited within the despair rage, a pure, black, volcanic fury that burned away the lethargy. Why? The question seared itself into his mind. They had come in peace. They had shared everything. They had trusted. This wasn't a battle. It was a violation. He looked at the silent, gray shell of the architect, the being he had once considered a colleague, almost a friend. Its silence was not empty. It was contemptuous. It was the silence of a god turning its back on a flawed creation. With a guttural roar, Eris forced himself to his feet. He would not die on his knees. He would not let humanity's final testament be a silent pile of dust on an alien world. His eyes darted around the dying arboretum, searching for something, anything. His gaze fell upon the emergency containment axe, mounted on the wall behind a polymer case. It was designed for severing contaminated root conduits, a tool of creation and preservation. Now, it would be a tool of something else entirely. He staggered to the wall, his muscles screaming in protest, the world swaying around him. He shattered the case with his elbow and gripped the axe's weighted handle. The metal was cold and real in his hand. He turned to face the architect, his reflection a distorted, wavering ghost on its dead, crystalline surface. He saw his own face, pale and streaked with tears of rage, but behind his eyes, a new and terrible light was dawning. The gentle botanist was gone, dissolved along with the dying roses. In his place stood something hard and unforgiving. He didn't know if he could harm the architect. It was a being of pure energy, And he was just flesh and bone. But he had to try. He had to leave a scar. It was a primal, illogical, purely human impulse. If you hurt me, I will hurt you back. If you kill me, I will die with my teeth in your throat. He raised the axe, the weight of it a final, desperate prayer. The silence of the dome was absolute, broken only by his own ragged breathing and the soft, whispering sigh of 10,000 leaves turning to dust. As he swung, a sound finally broke from the architect. It wasn't a symphony of light or a mathematical equation. It was a single, piercingly pure musical note that vibrated not in his ears, but directly in his skull. And with the note came a flood of understanding, a final, parting gift of knowledge from the lumen that was more cruel than any weapon. It was an image, a memory, not from their history, but from humanity's future. He saw fleets of human ships, not elegant vessels of exploration, on brutalist wedges of gray armor bristling with weapons he couldn't comprehend. He saw them descending upon world after world, not with greetings, but with fire. He saw them cracking planets open, boiling away oceans, and silencing the unique songs of 100 different alien races. He saw humanity, driven by a cold and unending fury, becoming the very thing the Lumen feared, a galactic plague. The Lumen were not murderers. They were gardeners, and they were pruning a weed before it could choke out the garden. They had seen the potential for boundless rage and vengeful fire simmering beneath humanity's charming curiosity and had made a calculated, dispassionate decision. They were not ending a species. They were preventing one. The axe fell from Eris's nerveless fingers, clattering onto the floor. The psychic vision vanished, leaving him gasping, the truth a shard of ice in his heart. They hadn't betrayed humanity. They had judged it. The lethargy returned with a vengeance. His legs buckling beneath him, he collapsed at the base of the silent machine, the life draining out of him, his last sight the ruin of his beautiful garden. Yet, in the final embers of his consciousness, the rage did not die. It refined itself. The Lumen's vision had been meant as a justification, a final, logical explanation for their actions. But they had made a fatal error in their cold calculations. They had shown a dying man that humanity was capable of fighting back. They had shown him that his species was not destined to become dust, but to become a fire. In showing him the monster they were trying to prevent, they had given him the blueprint for its creation. They thought they were cutting the root, but they had only planted a seed of pure, unadulterated vengeance in the one man who, by some statistical miracle or cosmic irony, was about to survive. Far below the arboretum floor, in the shielded, subterranean seed vault Eris had designed to be completely isolated from the planetary network, a fail-safe protocol kicked in. The vault, powered by its own fusion core and shielded against biological and energy signatures, registered the catastrophic collapse of all external life signs. Its primary function was to preserve Terran biology. Its secondary function, known only to Eris and a handful of senior staff, was Project Lazarus. The Vault's automated systems activated, voting Eris's failing body with a cocktail of advanced cytoregenerators, extremophile adaptogens, and neural stimulants. It would be a brutal, agonizing process, more of a resurrection than a recovery. And the man who woke up would not be the same man who fell. As the last of his consciousness faded, Eris Thorn's final thought was not of peace or understanding. It was a promise etched into the coming darkness with the cold clarity of a diamond. You showed me our future. I will build it. The garden was dead. It was time to forge a sword. The awakening was not a gentle return to the light, but a violent expulsion from the void. Eris Thorn was born again in fire and ice. His first sensation, a scream that was trapped in a throat not yet fully formed. The Lazarus Protocol was not designed for comfort. It was a brutal biological override, a cellular declaration of war against death itself. His consciousness returned in fractured shards, memories of a sunlit garden clashing with the sterile, cryogenic blue of the vault. He felt the phantom ache of his own dissolution, the memory of his cells unmaking themselves, a terror that lived not in his mind, but in the very marrow of his new bones. For weeks that blurred into an eternity, he was an infant in a man's body, learning to command limbs that felt alien, his every nerve ending screaming with the agony of accelerated regeneration. The Vault's medical AI, a dispassionate voice that was the only company he had where Ramirez has informed him that 27 standard Terran months had passed since the Great Betrayal. For over 2 years, he had been a slurry of genetic information, rebuilt atom by atom in the cold womb of his own failsafe. When he was finally able to stand, his legs trembling under the unfamiliar weight of a body denser and stronger than the one he remembered, he did not seek out a mirror. He knew the botanist with the kind eyes and easy smile was gone forever. The face that would look back would be a stranger's, a mask of scar tissue and cold purpose, and he had no time for strangers. His first act was not to grieve, but to take inventory. The Seed Vault, his Ark, was a subterranean marvel of bioengineering. It held the complete genetic library of Earth and its colonies, trillions of cryopreserved seeds, zygotes, and tissue samples. It had autonomous fabrication bays, organic chemistry labs, and a fusion core that could run for a millennium. It was designed to rebuild a world. Eris would use it to break one. He spent the first decade of his new life in monastic solitude, his only companion the hum of the Vault's machinery and the ghosts of his dead crew. He worked with a chilling, dispassionate fervor. He was no longer a scientist driven by curiosity. He was a weaponsmith, and his chosen medium was life itself. His knowledge of xenobotany, once used to foster symbiosis, was now repurposed for annihilation. He began with the fungi. He took a hyper-aggressive cordyceps strain from Earth's deepest jungles and spliced it with genes from the lumen's own crystalline flora, whose energy he could now replicate in his bioreactors. The result was a terrifying hybrid, a spore that could lie dormant for centuries, but upon contact with the lumen's energy signature, would germinate with explosive speed. Not just feeding on the energy and but converting it into a corrosive, self-replicating crystalline plague that would shatter the lumen from the inside out. He called it glass blight. Next, he turned to the fauna. He took the DNA of the Terran bombardier beetle and scaled it up, integrating the cellular structure of creatures that could withstand the vacuum of space. He designed a swarm of biomechanical insects, living munitions that could burrow through the hull of a ship or the crust of a planet, gestating for a designated period before detonating in a torrent of focused plasma. They were silent, tireless, and utterly expendable. He named them Maker's End. He worked, and in his work, he remade himself. He subjected his own body to the same brutal genetic engineering, hardening his bones with carbon-laced polymers, weaving redundant neural pathways into his brain, and making his flesh resistant to radiation and vacuum. He was becoming a living weapon, a vessel for the singular, burning purpose that had consumed him. His masterwork, however, was his escape plan. He could not build a ship of metal and wire. The lumen, the gardeners of this world, would sense its artificial energy signature instantly. He needed a Trojan horse, something that felt natural, something that belonged. So, he decided to grow one. In the Vault's largest cultivation bay, he laid the keel of his vessel, not with steel, but with the seed of a genetically engineered sequoia, crossbred with silicon-based life forms he had only theorized about before the fall. He fed it on a diet of heavy metals and pure energy from the reactor, guiding its growth with localized gravity fields and laser scalpels. Over the course of 30 years, it grew into a magnificent, terrifying thing. It was a vessel of living wood, its hull a seamless, miles-thick hide of bark as hard as diamond. Its interior was a labyrinth of pulsing, vascular corridors and chambers that smelled of rich soil and ozone. Veins of bioluminescent algae provided light, and the ship's functions, navigation, life support, propulsion were not controlled by computers, but by a distributed consciousness woven from a network of specialized neural fungi. It was a living, breathing creature, and Eris was its heart and its mind. He christened it Nemesis. He spent his days tending to it, speaking to it, pouring all his rage, his grief, and his cold, calculating hatred into its growth. The ship became the daughter he had lost, the legacy he would leave, the instrument of the vengeance he had promised himself in the ruins of the garden. While the Nemesis grew, he planned. He accessed the colony's archives, the last digital ghosts of his people. He studied star charts, galactic history, and the old and forgotten records of humanity's expansion. He learned that Kepler 186f was not the only human colony. There were others, scattered and isolated, flung far from Earth during the Great Diaspora centuries ago. They would be primitive, perhaps. Their technology decayed, but they were human. They were seeds of the army he would need to raise. 50 years after the Great Betrayal, the Nemesis was ready. Eris Thorn was now a man who looked like a creature carved from stone and regret, his eyes holding the cold, ancient light of a distant star. The launch would be the most dangerous part of his plan. The Nemesis was alive, and the moment it breached the surface, the Lumen would feel it. This sudden, monstrous new life blooming on their pristine world. He needed a distraction, a force of nature so vast it would mask his ascent. His geological surveys of the planet had revealed a supervolcano, dormant for millennia, its magma chamber a colossal aneurysm beneath the planet's crust. For the last 5 years of his preparation, Eris had been using the vault's deep earth drills to subtly weaken the chamber's capstone. He had planted a seed of a different kind, a catalyst that would trigger a chain reaction. His escape would be born from the planet's own fiery tantrum. The day he chose was preceded by a week of mounting tremors that shook the vault, a deep, guttural groaning from the planet itself. The AI calmly reported the escalating seismic activity, unaware of its artificial origin. Eris stood on the bridge of the Nemesis, a cavernous chamber at the heart of the ship, its walls glowing with a soft green light. He was neurally linked to the vessel, its senses, his senses. He could feel the soil and rock above him, feel the strain in the planet's crust. He closed his eyes, took a final deep breath, and gave the command. A continent away, the catalyst detonated. The supervolcano erupted with a force that dwarfed any atomic weapon humanity had ever conceived. A plume of ash and superheated gas blotted out the sun and the psychic scream of the planet itself. A wave of pure agony and chaos washed over the globe. In that moment of overwhelming sensory noise, as the Lumen's collective consciousness was focused on the wound in their world, the Nemesis breached the surface. It rose from the ground not with the fire of a rocket, but with the silent, inexorable power of a tree reaching for the sky. Its dark, organic hull, caked in soil and rock, looked like another shard of the planet cast upward by the eruption. It climbed, pushing through the choking ash cloud, its biological engines barely a whisper against the roar of the volcano. As the Nemesis cleared the upper atmosphere and the black, star-dusted velvet of space opened before it, Eris finally allowed himself to look back. Through the ship's senses, he saw Kepler 186F, his home, his paradise, his tomb. A jagged, glowing orange wound scarred its surface, a veil of black ash slowly shrouding the familiar continents. He felt no sadness, no nostalgia. He felt only the cold, clean satisfaction of a promise kept. The first promise. He had survived. Now, the real work began. He steered the Nemesis toward the faint, distant light of a G-class star system, a system noted in the old archives as harboring a lost colony ship that had gone silent 300 years ago. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was a start. He opened a channel, not for communication, but for a beacon. He didn't send a plea for help or a message of hope. He broadcast a simple deity repeating signal, encoded with the story of the Great Betrayal and the schematics for his new, terrible biological weapons. It was a message and a call to arms, a declaration of a new human purpose. At the end of the looping message, he left his signature, the name he was claiming for himself, an ultimate, final mockery of the aliens who had made him. He was not Eris Thorn, xenobotanist. He was humanity's new gardener, and he was coming to sow the seeds of war. The journey between stars was a lesson in the sublime indifference of the universe. Decades slipped by, measured only by the slow, metabolic pulse of the Nemesis and the methodical progress of Eris's work. In the crushing silence of the void, he found not peace, but focus. He was a monk in a monastery of his own making, and his god was vengeance. He spent his time not in quiet contemplation, but in a state of perpetual, controlled rage that he channeled into his creations. He ran simulations within the Nemesis's neural network, a psychic holodeck where he could unleash his plagues upon 1,000 virtual worlds. He watched the glass blight shatter crystalline cities into shimmering dust. He commanded swarms of Maker's End, directing their silent, burrowing paths to the cores of phantom planets, feeling a cold, grim satisfaction as they blossomed into spheres of fire. He refined their genetic code, making them faster, deadlier, more efficient. He was not merely preparing for war, he was perfecting the art of extermination. The man he had been, Eris Thorn, was a ghost that haunted him in the quiet moments between tasks. He would sometimes see a flicker of Alara's smile in the bioluminescent patterns on the corridor walls, or hear the echo of Eva Valerius's voice in the ship's sighing atmosphere. In the early years, these memories had been agony, a weakness he fought to excise. Now, they were fuel. He would deliberately summon the image of his daughter's face and hold it in his mind as he calibrated the lethal trajectory of a plasma swarm. He would remember the warmth of the Arboretum's sun on his skin as he reviewed the cellular decay caused by the glass blight. He was cauterizing his own soul, burning away the parts of him that could feel anything other than the burning imperative of his mission. He was no longer a man haunted by a memory. He was a weapon being sharpened by it. After nearly 80 years of interstellar travel, the Nemesis arrived in the Theseus system. The archives had called it a dead end, the final resting place of the colony ship Odyssey. But Eris's long-range biological sensors, another of his unique creations, had detected the faint but unmistakable signature of human life. It was a civilization clinging to existence not on a planet, but within the corpse of their own ship. The Odyssey had suffered a catastrophic engine failure 3 centuries ago, but its inhabitants had survived by hollowing out the massive asteroid it had been towing for planetary seeding. They had turned their tomb into a sanctuary, a sprawling, chaotic metropolis of scavenged tech and makeshift habitats dug deep into the rock. They called it the Carcass, and they called themselves Haven. The arrival of the Nemesis was an event that shattered their stagnant reality. To the people of Haven, who patched their recycled atmosphere scrubbers with prayer and wire, the sight of a living ship, a miles-long behemoth of dark wood and glowing green veins, was the stuff of myth. It moved with an eerie silence, eclipsing their tiny sun, its shadow falling over the carcass like the hand of a forgotten god. Alarms shrieked through the asteroid's corridors, and scrap metal fighters, little more than armed mining pods, swarmed out to meet the intruder, their chemical rockets spitting defiant fire against the impossible vessel. Eris watched them on the bridge's main chamber wall, which had become a transparent viewport to the stars. He saw their desperation, their courage, their pathetic technology. They were children throwing stones at a mountain. He did not fire back. He simply opened a channel. "I am human." His voice boomed across their comms, a voice aged by solitude and hardened by resolve. "I bring not war, but a warning. Stand down, and I will speak with your leader." The leader of Haven was a woman named Kaylin. She had been born in the tunnel, had worked the hydroponic farms and the ore refineries, and had risen to her position through sheer, unyielding pragmatism. She met Eris not in a grand hall, but in the docking bay, where a fleshy, pulsating umbilical from the Nemesis had connected with their rusted airlock. She stood flanked by guards in pitted armor, their projectile rifles aimed at the lone figure who emerged. Eris was a sight to behold. He wore no armor, only a simple bartunic spun from the Nemesis's own fibers. He stood taller than any man they had ever seen, his body lean and dense with engineered muscle, his face a roadmap of his long, painful history. But it was his eyes that held them. They were the eyes of a man who had stared into the abyss and had found the abyss wanting. "You are not from the Directorate," Kaylin stated, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her gut. "Their ships are metal. What are you?" Eris looked past her, at the faces of her people peering from the corridors, their expressions a mixture of fear and awe. "I am what happens when paradise is lost," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, metallic bay. "I am the gardener of a new Eden, one that will be planted in the soil of our enemies." He told them his story. He spoke of Kepler 186 If, of the Lumen, of the promise of partnership that had turned into a silent, horrifying genocide. He described the great betrayal, the way his people had turned to dust, their lives siphoned away by the silent, crystalline gods they had trusted. Kaylin and her council listened, their faces grim. It was a horrific story, a legend from a distant star, but it was not their story. "We grieve for your people," Kaylin said, her pragmatism overriding her pity. "But we have our own struggle. We survive. We are not warriors. This war of yours is not our concern." Eris had expected this. They were survivors, not soldiers. They saw the universe as a dangerous place to be endured, not a battleground to be conquered. He needed to change their perception, to shatter their isolation and baptize them in his own righteous fire. "You think you are safe here," Eris said, taking a step forward. The guards tensed, but he ignored them, his gaze locked on Kaylin. "You think your rock and your rust will protect you. You are wrong. The silence between the stars is not empty. It is listening. The Lumen are not the only ones. There are others, older, stranger, who view humanity as a fleeting nuisance, a weed in their ancient garden. The only reason you are alive is because you are too small to have been noticed. But that will change. Humanity will always reach, always grow. And when you do, They will come for you. Not with warnings, but with eradication. His words were compelling, but they were still just words. Kaylin shook her head. We will not trade our certain survival for your hypothetical war. A thin, hold smile touched Eris's lips. Then I will not ask you to believe me, he said softly. I will make you understand. He closed his eyes. The deck beneath their feet hummed as the Nemesis diverted a fraction of its immense neural processing power. The psychic architecture he had based on the lumen's own biology reached out, a gentle and invisible tendril of energy that bypassed their senses and touched their minds directly. It was not an attack. It was an invitation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a collective gasp swept through the docking bay. The guards lowered their rifles, their eyes wide with a horror that was not their own. Kaylin stumbled back, a hand flying to her mouth as the vision flooded her consciousness. She was there, in the Grand Arboretum. She felt the warmth of the alien sun, smelled the perfume of the dying roses. She felt the creeping lethargy, the cellular dissolution, the silent, screaming terror of being unmade. She witnessed the great betrayal not as a story, but as a memory, a trauma seared directly onto her soul. She felt Eris's despair, his rage, his final, desperate swing of the axe, and the horrifying revelation that followed the vision of a future where humanity was a plague. But she also felt what Eris had felt, the burning, absolute conviction that such a future, however monstrous, was better than no future at all. The psychic broadcast lasted less than a minute, but it shattered the 300-year history of Haven. When it ended, the people in the docking bay were on their knees, weeping, shaking, not from fear, but from a shared, newly birthed rage. They had all died in that garden. They had all been betrayed. Kaylin looked up at Eris, her face pale, her eyes filled with a new and terrible light. The pragmatist was gone, replaced by a convert. She saw him now not as a man, but as a prophet, an avatar of their own stolen future. What? What do you want from us? She whispered, her voice hoarse. Eris looked out at the sea of newly forged zealots, his expression grim and resolute. I want your hands, your minds, your anger. I want you to turn this tomb into a shipyard. I want you to help me build a fleet of ghosts and monsters. The Lumen showed me what we must become to survive. They called us a plague. It's time we embraced the diagnosis. Kaylin slowly rose to her feet, her people rising with her. In the space of a minute, he had transformed a community of survivors into the first congregation of his Church of Vengeance. We are yours, she said, the words tasting like iron and ash in her mouth. Show us how to fight. Eris nodded, the cold satisfaction returning. The first seed had taken root in fertile ground. The work of the gardener had begun. Soon, the galaxy would learn a new definition of the word harvest. The transformation of Haven was a brutal and rapid metamorphosis, like a chrysalis being violently torn open. Under Eris's guidance, the carcass ceased to be a sanctuary and became a forge. The quiet, rhythmic clang of the ore refineries was replaced by the screaming shriek of advanced fabrication bays, their designs broadcast directly from the Nemesis. The hydroponic farms that had sustained generations were converted into bioreactors, churning out the precursors for the glass blight and the genetic slurry needed to breed swarms of Maker's End. The people of Haven, once content with the simple goal of seeing the next cycle's sunrise, were consumed by a new, feverish purpose. Eris was a relentless and unforgiving teacher. He had no patience for doubt or hesitation. He interfaced his mind with their crude computer systems, pouring 50 years of weaponized biology and tactical simulations directly into their archives. Engineers who had spent their lives patching rusted pipes were now learning to weave neural pathways into biomechanical fighters. Miners who had once sought veins of iron now carved out vast birthing chambers for the living munitions. Kalen was his right hand, a perfect instrument of his will. The psychic trauma of the Great Betrayal had burned away her cautious pragmatism, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated zeal. She drove her people with a fervor that bordered on cruelty, justifying every sacrifice, every grueling shift. With the doctrine Orcs had given them, survival is not enough. Only dominance ensures existence. Eris himself remained an aloof and terrifying figure, rarely leaving the nemesis. He became more myth than man, the gardener or the first survivor, his voice a disembodied command that echoed through their comms. His presence a constant, brooding shadow that eclipsed their sun. His true focus was on the creation of the fleet. The nemesis was a marvel, a unique masterpiece of vengeance, but it could not be everywhere at once. He needed a swarm. Using the nemesis as a womb, he began to grow the first of the Thorn ships. They were smaller, faster, and more specialized. He grew assault craft from the seeds of predatory fungi, their hulls chitinous and black, designed to silently attach to enemy vessels and disgorge boarding parties. He grew plague vectors, living carriers for the glass blight, their interiors little more than vast sacks of dormant spores, their only purpose to reach a target world and rupture, seeding the atmosphere with an extinction-level event. And he grew the shepherds, command ships that, like the nemesis, were sentient, their minds cloned from fragments of its own neural architecture. They were a fleet of living nightmares, a navy of biological horrors that no conventional military could comprehend. While the fleet grew, Eris began the second phase of his plan, the creation of his soldiers. The people of Haven were willing, but they were not weapons. Their bodies were frail, their minds unsuited for the horrors he was planning to unleash. He established the grafting pits, where volunteers underwent the same brutal bioaugmentation he had performed on himself. They were remade, their bones laced with carbon, their blood replaced with an oxygen-rich nanite solution, their minds hardwired with tactical data and a fanatical loyalty to his cause. The process was agonizing and often fatal. For every success, 2 volunteers died on the operating slab, their bodies unable to withstand the violent rewriting of their own biology. Kalen fed the pits a steady stream of her most devout followers, calling it the ultimate act of faith. The failures were not mourned, they were recycled, their biomass feeding the very reactors that would build the next generation of ships and soldiers. Humanity was becoming a closed system, a self-devouring serpent endlessly forging itself into a sharper sword. Not everyone embraced the new doctrine. A small faction, led by an old engineer named Lauren, saw Eris not as a savior, but as a monster. Lauren remembered the days before the gardener's arrival, the quiet struggle for survival that had, in its own way, been a life of peace. He saw the faces of the young people marching into the grafting pits, their eyes hollow with a manufactured fanaticism. He saw the beauty of their self-contained world being sacrificed for a war they had never asked for. He tried to reason with Kalen, pleading with her in the council chambers that had once echoed with debates on crop rotation and now rang with plans for planetary annihilation. "Look at what we are becoming," Lauren begged, his old voice trembling with passion. "He is burning away our humanity to fuel his own hatred. We are trading our souls for a victory we may not even live to see." Kalen's response was cold and swift. She looked at the old man who had once been her mentor and saw only heresy. The humanity you speak of died in a garden 50 light years away, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a weakness, a flaw in our design. The gardener is correcting it. We should be grateful. That night, Lauren and his followers were rounded up. Eris made them into an example. He did not grant them a quick death. Instead, he brought them aboard the Nemesis to a chamber deep within the ship where a captured fragment of Lumen technology was kept a sliver of the architect he had failed to destroy. Now a prisoner and a power source, he forced the dissenters to interface with it, to experience the great betrayal as he had. But he didn't give them the accompanying rage, the vision of human vengeance. He gave them only the pure, undiluted horror of their species' extinction, looping it over and over again until their minds shattered. Their catatonic bodies were later returned to the central plaza of the carcass, a silent, drooling testament to the price of dissent. After that, there were no more objections. After a decade of relentless and fanatical labor, the first Ghost Fleet was ready. 30 Thorn ships, black and silent, hovered in the shadow of the Nemesis. Their crews were the grafted, their minds a seamless extension of their shepherd commanders, their souls pledged to the gardener. Kalen stood beside Eris on the bridge of the Nemesis, looking out at the terrible beauty of their creation. They are ready, she said, her voice filled with a reverence that was almost religious. What is our first target? Eris looked at the star chart shimmering on the chamber wall. His finger traced a path back toward the galactic core, back toward the territory of the fallen empires from the old Earth archives. He didn't select a military target, a starbase, or an industrial world. He chose a small, peaceful system inhabited by a race of silicon-based artisans known as the Signian Shapers. The Shapers were renowned for their exquisite sculptures carved from stellar winds and nebular gas. Their culture, a testament to creation and beauty. They were utterly harmless. Them, Kalen asked, a flicker of confusion in her otherwise perfect faith. They have no fleet, no weapons. It would be a slaughter, not a battle. Eris turned to her, his cold eyes seeming to pierce through her. A battle is a conversation between two forces who believe they have a chance to win, he explained, his voice as patient and chilling as a winter frost. We will not be having conversations. We are delivering a sermon. The purpose of the first strike is not to defeat an enemy, but to create fear. We will not be conquerors. Kalen, conquerors have to hold territory, to govern, to deal with rebellions. It is inefficient. We will be a force of nature. A hurricane does not conquer a coastline. It scours it clean and moves on. We will go to the most peaceful, most vibrant, most beloved system we can find, and we will erase it so completely that the only thing left will be a story, a ghost story, and we will tell that story to the rest of the galaxy. Kalen understood. This was not war in the traditional sense. It was psychological terrorism on a cosmic scale. The goal was not to win, but to scar the collective consciousness of the galaxy so deeply that no one would ever dare threaten humanity again. It was the ultimate extrapolation of his promise to become the nightmare. The Ghost Fleet moved out, not with the roar of engines, but with the silence of the void itself. Their biological propulsion systems left no energy signature, their dark chitinous hulls absorbing all light. They fell upon the Cygnus system like a silent, fatal disease. The plague vectors went in first, their arrival unnoticed until they ruptured in the upper atmosphere of the Shaper's primary world. The glass blight descended, an invisible, glittering rain of death. It was a plague perfectly tailored to a silicon-based life form. The beautiful, intricate bodies of the Shapers began to crystallize. their living forms locked into grotesque, screaming statues of agonizing beauty, their cities of woven light and stellar gas shattered into trillions of pieces, their songs silenced, their art undone. Within a single rotation, a civilization that had existed for millennia was reduced to a planet of glittering, lifeless glass. The rest of the fleet did not fire a single shot. They simply hung in orbit, broadcasting one thing into the void on all frequencies, the psychic recording of the great betrayal. They showed the galaxy not just what they had done, but why. The message was clear. This is what was done to us. This is what we will now do to you. We are not the aggressors. We are the consequence. As the fleet prepared to depart, leaving behind the silent, crystalline tomb of Cygnus, Kaelin turned to Eris. "The galaxy will hear of this," she said. "They will unite against us. They will come for us." Eris stared out at the dead world, his face impassive. "I know," he said. "Let them come. My garden needs more fertilizer." The ghost fleet slipped back into the darkness, leaving behind a new star in the galactic consciousness, a star of fear. The gardener had planted his first seed of terror, and he would wait patiently for the inevitable, bloody harvest. The sermon of Cygnus echoed through the galaxy, traveled not as a coherent message, but as a psychic shockwave, a tremor of pure terror that resonated in the collective subconscious of every starfaring race. The story of the silent, glass-covered world and the broadcast of a forgotten human tragedy became a myth whispered in 1,000 different languages. The ghost fleet, once an unknown entity, became the new face of cosmic dread. As Eris had predicted, the galaxy did not bow. It recoiled in horror and unified in fear. The Galactic Concord was born, a desperate, sprawling alliance of old enemies and new allies, their ancient grievances dwarfed by the existential threat of humanity. Fleets of crystalline warships, organic leviathans, and sleek metallic destroyers assembled at strategic choke points, preparing for a war against an enemy that fought by no known rules. But Eris did not give them the war they expected. The Ghost Fleet did not engage their armadas. It flowed around them like water, striking at the Concord's heart, not its sword arm. They bypassed military outposts and fell upon cultural archives, university worlds, and sacred pilgrimage sites. They didn't level cities. They seeded them with tailored biological agents that caused mass hallucinations, turning populations against each other in a frenzy of paranoia. They didn't bombard planets. They deployed sonic emitters that broadcast the screams of the dying from Cygnus, shattering the morale of entire systems. Every strike was a meticulously crafted piece of psychological warfare, a new verse in the gardener's terrible sermon, and the war became a contest between a hammer and a ghost, and the ghost was winning. Desperation drove the Conquered to an unthinkable conclusion. If they were to fight this monster, they needed to understand its creators. A delegation, the largest and most diverse in galactic history, was dispatched on a final, desperate pilgrimage back to the source, to the system that had birthed this plague, Kepler 186. They went not as conquerors, but as supplicants, to beg the legendary and terrifyingly powerful Lumen to intervene, to help them prune the weed they had failed to eradicate a century ago. Oi! On the bridge of the Nemesis, hidden in the swirling dust of a dead nebula, Eris watched the conquered fleet approach the world of his damnation. Kaelin stood beside him, her augmented form rigid with anticipation. "They are going to them," she breathed, a note of triumphant hatred in her voice. "The fools are leading us right to them." A rare, genuine smile touched Eris's lips. It was a terrifying sight, a crack in a stone facade that revealed the furnace burning within. "Leading us," he corrected softly. Kalen, I have been herding them here for 20 years. Every strike, every feint, every whispered horror was a shepherd's call, guiding this lost flock back to the wolf's den. This has never been about them. He turned from the viewport, his eyes burning with a light that seemed to eclipse the stars. All of this, the fleet, Haven, and the terror, it was all just a way to draw the lumen out, to make them show themselves, to force them to participate. You cannot kill a god that hides in its garden. You must first burn the garden down to make it angry. The truth of his century-long plan settled over Kalen. The Galactic War was a mere prelude, a complex and brutal piece of theater designed for an audience of one, the Lumen. Seeing their prediction of a human plague come to pass in the most horrific way imaginable, agreed to help. From the surface of Kepler 186f, a wave of pure energy surged, a psychic call that rippled across the system, and from the depths of the planet, the architects rose, not one, but thousands of them, their crystalline forms blazing with the righteous. Cold fury of a god roused from its slumber. They joined the Concord fleet, their power turning the tide in an instant. They could perceive the Ghost Fleet's biological signatures. They could erect shields of pure gravity, and they could communicate on a psychic level that bypassed all human technology. They were the perfect counter. Eris broadcast his final command to the fleet. Disperse. Survive. Remind them. The Thorn ships and plague vectors faded back into the void, their mission of terror now a self-perpetuating legacy. Then, he turned the Nemesis, his living vessel, his life's work, his first and only child, toward home. Alone, the great, dark ship moved against the combined might of the galaxy, a single note of defiance against a symphony of power. The battle was short and apocalyptic. The Concord fleet threw everything it had at the Nemesis. Missiles detonated against its diamond-hard bark, leaving barely a scorch mark. Energy beams, capable of boiling oceans, were absorbed and dissipated by the ship's biological structure. But the architects were different. They did not attack the ship. They attacked the life within it. They sent waves of pure, annihilating energy. The same silent death that had scoured the Arboretum. The outer layers of the Nemesis began to die, its living corridors turning to gray, brittle dust. Eris, on the bridge, felt the agony of his ship as if it were his own flesh. Alarms screamed, not in electronic beeps, but in the psychic wails of the ship's dying consciousness. He pushed on, his will the only thing holding the disintegrating vessel together. He ignored the enemy fleet, his eyes fixed on the planet, on the grand Arboretum, the site of his death and rebirth. He was not there to win a battle. He was there to plant his last and most important seed. As the Nemesis plunged into the upper atmosphere, a dying, burning meteor of vengeance. The Lumen combined their power, forming a single titanic architect of pure light, a being the size of a continent. To intercept it, Eris met its psychic presence with his own, and in that final moment, he opened the core of his mind, the core of the Nemesis, and let his final creation loose. It wasn't a plague of the body. It was a plague of the soul. For 150 years, Eris had cultivated not just weapons, but an idea. He had taken the most potent and destructive forces of human nature: grief, individuality, doubt, rage, the agony of memory, and encoded them into a psychoactive virus, a metaphysical cancer. The Nemesis was its delivery system. The ship slammed into the colossal architect, and in a blinding flash of light and psychic energy that shattered every ship in orbit, it ruptured. The plague was released. It did not kill the Lumen. It did something infinitely worse. It gave them a soul, the perfect, harmonious, collective consciousness of the lumen was shattered into billions of individual points of awareness, each one suddenly burdened with a horrifying new sensation, the self. They were flooded with the memories of Eris Thorn. They felt the loss of his daughter, the betrayal of his friends, the searing agony of his lonely rage. Their perfect mathematical logic was corrupted by the illogical, chaotic, and beautiful torment of being human. A single, unified God was broken into a pantheon of fractured, grieving individuals. The psychic scream of their fall was the last thing the Concord fleet heard before they broke and fled in terror, realizing they had borne witness not to a victory, but to a deicide. Eris Thorn died in that flash, his consciousness dissolving as it became the catalyst for the plague. His body, his ship, and his soul were the seed, and the entire world of Kepler 186f was the soil. He had become one with his enemy, a permanent scar of memory and pain on their newfound souls, a ghost in their shattered machine. His final promise was kept. He did not just defeat his enemies, he remade them in his own broken image. Across the galaxy, the ghost fleets continued their work, but now there was no one left to fight. The Concord had collapsed, its members scattering to their home systems to hide from the terrible new silence that had fallen. Humanity had won. They were the undisputed, reifying masters of a universe that was now too afraid to speak. On the bridge of a Shepherd command ship, Kalen, now the de facto leader of the human race, looked out at the star chart. Every system was now marked with a fear of their passage. They were utterly alone, adrift in a sea of their own making, and they were no longer the hunted. They were the haunting, and they had survived. They had dominated, but standing in the silent, glowing void, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 worlds. Kalen could not escape the gardener's final, chilling lesson sometimes. The only thing worse than being the weed is being the one left standing alone in the silent, empty garden you have created.